The Crystal Palace Hotel glowed like a jewel box on that autumn evening. Every surface gleamed with polished perfection, from the marble columns that stretched toward cathedral ceilings to the champagne fountains cascading in elegant tiers. The Sterling Foundation Gala drew the city's most powerful figures. Men and women whose signatures could shift economies and whose whispers could end careers. Outside, limousines arrived in a steady stream, depositing guests wrapped in designer gowns and tailored suits. Camera flashes created a constellation of light as photographers jostled for position behind velvet ropes. Claire. Bennett moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility. At 24, she had mastered the art of becoming part of the background at these events. Her black uniform blended with the shadows between golden lights, her steps silent on floors that reflected chandeliers like mirrors reflecting stars. She balanced a tray of crystal champagne flutes with careful precision, counting the hours until she could return to her cramped studio apartment and the photography equipment she had saved months to afford. Tonight meant good tips, enough to keep her dreams alive for another month, the weight of expectations across the vast ballroom. Ryan Sterling stood at the center of calculated power. At 34, he had transformed his father's successful tech company into a global empire. Sterling Enterprises dominated markets across 3 continents, and Ryan's name carried weight that opened doors and silenced opposition. He wore his authority like the perfectly tailored suit that draped his broad shoulders, every gesture controlled and measured, yet beneath the composed exterior, tension coiled in his chest like a spring wound too tight. Tonight was supposed to seal his fate. The engagement announcement had been planned for months, coordinated between the Sterling and Hammond families like a military operation. Victoria Hammond stood somewhere in the crowd, elegant and poised, the perfect partner selected by committees and accountants. Their marriage would merge to fortunes and secure deals worth billions. The alliance made perfect sense on paper, in boardrooms. In the cold logic of dynastic planning, Ryan had agreed because refusing seemed impossible. His father, Robert Sterling, made the expectations crystal clear during countless conversations that felt more like commands. The family legacy demanded sacrifice, and personal desires were luxuries that men in their position could not afford. Ryan had learned that lesson young, had watched his own mother bend beneath the weight of duty until she became a stranger to herself. He had promised himself he would not become that hollow, but with each passing year, the reflection in the mirror showed a man he barely recognized. The moment everything changed, Claire did not see the chair leg protruding into the narrow path between tables. Her shoe caught the edge, and time seemed to slow as her tray tilted. Champagne arced through the air in golden streams, splashing across the silk sleeve of a woman dripping with diamonds. Gasps rippled through nearby guests like stones dropped in still water. The woman's face contorted with outrage, her voice sharp. It's broken glass as she berated the clumsy waitress who had dared to touch her expensive gown. Claire stammered apologies, her hands shaking as she dabbed uselessly at the spreading stain. Laughter followed her retreat, cruel and casual. The sound of people who had never known what it meant to need this job desperately. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as she hurried toward the service entrance, blinking back tears that would only make everything worse. She had promised herself she would be invisible tonight, that she would survive without incident. Instead, she had become the evening's entertainment. A cautionary tale about knowing your place. From his position near the stage, Ryan watched the scene unfold. Something about the young woman's mortification caught his attention. Perhaps the way she tried to make herself smaller, to disappear into the crowd that mocked her. In that moment, she looked more real than anyone else in the room. Everyone around him wore masks of sophistication and confidence, playing roles they had rehearsed since childhood. But this waitress, trembling with genuine shame, was achingly authentic. The master of ceremonies approached the microphone, preparing to summon Ryan and Victoria to the stage. The engagement announcement would lock the cage door forever. Ryan's gaze swept the ballroom one final time, searching for something he could not name. Then he saw her again, standing near a pillar with empty hands, her eyes haunted by the kind of vulnerability that wealth could never understand. In that instant, A reckless idea seized him with the force of revelation. The kiss. It shattered everything. Ryan moved with the decisive speed that had built his empire. Guests parted before him, confusion and curiosity flickering across their faces as the evening's host strode toward a waitress instead of his intended bride. Claire looked up, startled, as he stopped directly in front of her. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity. The noise of the gala faded to silence. His voice was low, urgent, meant only for her. "Please pretend for me," before Claire could process the words. Before she could ask what he meant or why he had chosen her, his hand settled at her waist. The touch was firm but not rough, anchoring her to the moment. Then Ryan Sterling, heir to billions and master of his carefully constructed world, lowered his head and kissed her. The ballroom erupted. Cameras flashed with machine gun intensity, capturing the impossible scene from every angle. Voices rose in a cacophony of shock and speculation. On the stage, Victoria Hammond stood frozen, her practiced smile cracking like porcelain. Robert Sterling's face turned the color of aged wine, his hands clenching into fists. The Sterling family elders gaped at the destruction of months of careful planning. Watching their dynasty's future unravel in a single impulsive act, Claire's mind went blank. The kiss lasted perhaps 5 seconds, but in those moments her entire existence shifted on its axis. She could taste champagne on his lips, could feel the solid strength of him against her trembling body. The weight of hundreds of stairs pressed down like physical force, crushing the breath from her lungs. When Ryan finally stepped back, his arm remained around her shoulders. A shield and a claim simultaneously. The aftermath begins. The master of ceremonies fumbled with the microphone, unsure whether to proceed or flee. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire through dry grass, each person turning to their neighbor with theories and speculation. Claire stood rigid, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might burst through her ribs. She could hear fragments of questions hurled from every direction. Who is she? Why would he do this? What about Victoria? Is this real? Ryan's expression remained calm, almost serene, as if he had planned this scandal from the beginning. To the shocked guests, he appeared in complete control, a man making a deliberate statement. Only Claire, standing within the circle of his arm, could feel the tension vibrating through him. This was not a game or a performance. This was a man throwing away everything he had been told to value. Gambling on a moment of desperate impulse, Victoria descended from the stage with measured steps, her composure barely containing the fury that blazed in her eyes. She stopped several feet away, her voice icy with restrained violence. I hope she was worth it. The threat in those words hung heavy in the perfumed air. Then she turned and walked away. Her silver gown trailing behind her like a banner of war, Robert Sterling pushed through the crowd, his face thunderous. He did not speak to his son, could not find words adequate to his rage. Instead, he glared at Claire with open contempt, as if she had orchestrated this disaster, as if she had somehow seduced his heir into this public humiliation. Claire wanted to explain that she had done nothing, that she was as shocked as anyone, but her voice had abandoned her. Leaving only the rapid thunder of her pulse, Ryan guided her toward the exit with quiet authority, ignoring the questions thrown at them like weapons. His car waited outside, sleek and black, a refuge from the chaos. As they settled into the leather seats and the door closed, muffling the shouting reporters, Claire finally found her voice. What have you done? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Heavy with disbelief and dawning horror, Ryan met her gaze. And for the first time she saw past the confident exterior to the man beneath. He looked suddenly exhausted, as if he had been holding himself upright through sheer will. I escaped, he said simply, and I dragged you with me. The car pulled away from the Crystal Palace Hotel, leaving behind the ruins of the life Ryan Sterling had been expected to lead. In the back seat, Claire pressed trembling fingers to her lips, still feeling the ghost of that impossible kiss. She had entered the gala as a nobody, invisible among the rich and powerful. She was leaving as the woman who had somehow stolen the most, this eligible bachelor from under the nose of high society. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger, Someone thrust into a story she had not chosen and did not understand. The city lights blurred past as questions without answers crowded her mind. She had no idea what came next, no plan for navigating the storm that was surely gathering. She knew only one terrible certainty: nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Dawn broke over the city with merciless brightness, and with it came the headlines that would define Claire Bennett's new reality. She woke in her small apartment to the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand, a relentless buzzing that refused to stop. 37 missed calls, 62 text messages. Her social media accounts had exploded overnight with notifications that made her stomach twist into knots. Claire reached for her phone with trembling hands, then immediately wished she had not. Every news website, every gossip blog, every social media platform displayed the same image. Her face, caught in that moment of shock, pressed against Ryan Sterling's lips beneath the glittering chandeliers. The photograph had captured everything in brutal detail: her wide eyes, her cheap uniform, the obvious gap between their worlds. Headlines screamed variations of the same story, each more sensational than the last. Mystery waitress steals billionaire's heart. Sterling scandal rocks high society. From champagne spills to champagne kisses. Who is Claire Bennett? She scrolled through article after article, each one dissecting her life with surgical precision. Reporters had already uncovered her employment history, her unpaid student loans, the small photography blog she maintained with dreams of someday going professional. They had found her high school yearbook photo, quotes from former classmates she barely remembered, even details about her mother's death 3 years ago. Her entire existence had been excavated and displayed for public consumption. The price of visibility by the time Claire forced herself to shower and dress. Protesters had gathered outside her apartment building. She discovered them when she peeked through her curtains, a small crowd holding signs and shouting slogans. Some defended her as a romantic Cinderella figure. Others condemned her as a manipulative gold digger who had trapped an innocent billionaire. Reporters camped on the sidewalk, cameras ready to capture her first public appearance since the kiss. Claire sank onto her worn sofa, her legs unable to support her weight. How had this happened? 24 hours ago, she had been invisible, struggling to pay rent and save money for the photography courses that represented her only hope for a better future. Now she was the most talked about woman in the city. Every opinion about her was formed by strangers who knew nothing of who she actually was. Her phone rang again. This time she recognized the number as her workplace, the catering company that provided staff for high-end events. Her manager's voice was cold, professional, stripped of any warmth. "Claire, given the current situation and the attention you are bringing to our business, we have decided it would be best if you took an extended leave, indefinitely." The words hit like a physical blow. She tried to explain that she had done nothing wrong, that she had been as surprised as anyone by what happened at the gala. But her manager cut her off with practiced efficiency. The company could not afford to be associated with scandal. Clients were already requesting that she'd not work their events. The decision was final. Claire ended the call with numb fingers. She had just lost her job, her primary source of income, because a billionaire had decided to use her as an escape route from his arranged marriage. Anger flared hot in her chest, burning away some of the shock. Ryan Sterling had destroyed her life without asking permission, without considering the consequences she would face while he retreated to his penthouse fortress. An unexpected visitor, the knock on her door, came just after noon. Claire considered ignoring it, assuming it was another reporter hunting for a quote. But something made her check the peephole, and her breath caught in her throat. Ryan Sterling stood in her dingy hallway, looking impossibly out of place in his expensive suit. 2 security guards flanked him. Keeping back the cameras that had followed him up the stairs, Claire opened the door a crack, her voice sharp with barely contained fury. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here." Ryan's gray eyes met hers steadily. "We need to talk. Please." Against her better judgment, Claire stepped aside to let him enter. The security guards remained outside, blocking the view of any reporters brave enough to venture into the building. Ryan stepped into her small living space, and she saw him take in the peeling paint, the secondhand furniture, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. The gap between their worlds had never been more obvious. "I lost my job," Claire said without preamble. "Because of you? Because you decided to use me for whatever game you were playing with your family." Ryan turned to face her, and she was surprised to see genuine regret in his expression. "I know. I am sorry for that. But I can fix it." "Fix it?" Claire laughed, the sound bitter and broken. "Have you seen what they are saying about me? They are calling me a schemer, a manipulator, someone who spilled champagne on purpose to get your attention. My entire life is being torn apart by strangers who think they know who I am." "I know." Ryan's voice was quiet but firm. "That is why I am here. To offer you a way through this." The proposal. Ryan moved to her small kitchen table and gestured for her to sit. Claire remained standing, arms crossed defensively over her chest. He studied her for a moment, then began speaking with the same directness he probably used in boardrooms when negotiating billion-dollar deals. "The world believes you are my girlfriend now. My family is furious. Victoria and her parents are threatening legal action for breach of contract. The board of directors is panicking about investor confidence. Everyone wants me to issue a statement saying last night was a mistake, that you meant nothing." "And do it," Claire said, though the words tasted like ash. "Tell them the truth. I will disappear, and your life can go back to normal." "I do not want normal." "What?" Ryan leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. "That normal was suffocating me. An arranged marriage to a woman I do not love, a life scripted by my father's expectations, decades of pretending to be satisfied with a business transaction instead of a real relationship. Last night, I broke free, and I will not go back." Claire shook her head, bewildered. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything." Ryan pulled a folder from his jacket and placed it on the table. "I need you to continue pretending to be my girlfriend. Just for a few months until the pressure from my family eases and the Montgomery alliance is dead beyond revival. In exchange, I will compensate you more than fairly." He opened the folder to reveal documents with numbers that made Claire's head spin. Enough money to pay off every debt she owed, to enroll in the best photography program in the country, to never worry about rent or groceries again. Enough money to transform her life completely. "This is insane," Claire whispered. "You want to pay me to be your fake girlfriend? I want to pay you to stand beside me while I fight for my freedom." Ryan's voice softened. "I saw you last night after you spilled that champagne. You looked the way I have felt for years, trapped and humiliated and desperate to be anywhere else. In a room full of people, performing for each other, you were the only one who was real. That is why I chose you." The weight of decision. Claire stared at the contract, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to throw him out, to reject everything he represented and the chaos he had brought into her life. But another part, the practical part that had kept her alive through years of struggle, whispered seductively about what that money could mean. No more choosing between groceries and electricity. No more panic at the sight of the mailbox. No more dreams deferred because survival took everything she had. "Why should I believe you will protect me?" she asked. "The reporters are already destroying my reputation. Your family hates me. People I have never met are calling me terrible things online. How does pretending to be your girlfriend make any of that better?" Ryan stood and crossed to where she stood by the window. "Because right now, you are a scandal. But if you stand beside me, if you attend events as my partner, if I make it clear that you matter to me, they will have to treat you with respect. The media will adjust their story. You will stop being the waitress who trapped me and become the woman I chose. It will not be easy, but I will be there. I will protect you from the worst of it." "And what happens when this arrangement ends?" Claire met his gaze. "When your family finally gives up and you do not need me anymore, I just go back to being nobody, except now, with a reputation as the woman who dated Ryan Sterling for a few months. You will have financial security and the skills to build whatever life you want." Ryan's voice was steady, certain. "I am not offering you forever, Claire. I am offering you a chance to survive this storm you did not ask for and come out the other side stronger." The honesty of it struck her. He was not promising love or romance, was not pretending this was anything other than a business arrangement. In a strange way, that made it easier to consider. This was a transaction clear and defined. With terms she could understand, accepting the storm, Claire looked around her tiny apartment. At the life she had built through sheer determination and endless work, she thought about her mother, who had sacrificed everything for her daughter's future, who had died believing Claire would find a way to make her dreams real. This money, this opportunity, it was not what her mother would have wanted. But it was a lifeline thrown into drowning waters. How long? Claire asked quietly. 8 months, maybe 4. Long enough for the engagement scandal to fade, and for my family to understand I will not be controlled. And during those months, what exactly would I have to do? Ryan outlined the expectations with businesslike efficiency. Public appearances at select events. Coordinated social media presence. Living part-time at his penthouse to make the relationship appear genuine. Behaving affectionately when cameras were present. Nothing physical beyond what was necessary for appearances. Claire's hand shook as she picked up the contract. The numbers swam before her eyes, representing safety and opportunity she had never imagined possessing. But underneath the relief, fear coiled tight in her chest. She would be stepping fully into the spotlight, exposing herself to judgment and hatred from people who already despised her. She would be lying to the entire world, pretending to care for a man she barely knew. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I need your promise that you will be honest with me. No surprises, no secrets. If something changes, if this arrangement becomes dangerous, you tell me immediately. You have my word." Claire took a deep breath, then reached for a pen. Her signature looked small and uncertain on the official documents, but once the ink dried, the decision was made. She had agreed to become Ryan Sterling's pretend girlfriend, to step into a role she had never auditioned for, to risk everything on the promise of a man she had kissed once under false pretenses. The first public appearance, Ryan insisted they make their first official appearance together, that very evening. A charity dinner was scheduled at an upscale restaurant downtown, and his absence would only fuel speculation. Better to face the cameras immediately, to show a united front before the narrative spiraled further out of control. A stylist arrived at Claire's apartment within an hour, bringing racks of designer clothing that probably cost more than Claire's annual rent. The woman worked with ruthless efficiency, selecting a deep emerald dress that hugged Claire's figure without being overtly sexy. Professional but romantic, the stylist declared. Elegant but approachable, Claire stood in front of her bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. Her hair had been styled in soft waves, her makeup applied with expert precision. The dress fit perfectly, transforming her from struggling waitress to someone who might plausibly belong at Ryan Sterling's side. Yet underneath the expensive facade, she was still terrified. Ryan returned at 7, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than everything Claire owned combined. He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his gray eyes. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The words should have felt like part of the performance. But something in his tone made Claire's pulse quicken. She pushed the feeling away. This was business. Nothing more? The car ride to the restaurant was silent, both of them lost in their own thoughts. But as they pulled up to the entrance and saw the wall of photographers waiting, Ryan reached across the seat and took her hand. His grip was warm, steady, grounding. "Remember," he said quietly, "you belong here. Act like you believe it, and they will too." Claire nodded, though her throat was too tight for words. The car door opened, and suddenly they were in the eye of the storm. Cameras flashed with blinding intensity. Reporters shouted questions over each other, their voices blending into an incomprehensible roar. Claire's instinct was to hide, to duck her head and run. But Ryan's hand at the small of her back kept her moving forward, steady and sure. Inside the restaurant, every conversation stopped as they entered. Eyes tracked their progress across the dining room to the private table reserved for Sterling Enterprises. Claire could feel the weight of judgment pressing down from all sides, could see the whispers hidden behind raised hands. Ryan pulled out her chair with practiced courtesy, then sat beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. The dinner conversation flowed around them. Business associates and social acquaintances offering carefully neutral greetings while their eyes gleamed with curiosity. Ryan handled it all with smooth confidence, occasionally including Claire in the discussion, treating her opinions as if they mattered. She followed his lead, speaking little but smiling when appropriate, playing the role of supportive girlfriend. But underneath the performance, Claire's mind raced. This was her life now, at least for the next few months. Cameras and questions and the constant pressure of 1,000 watching eyes. She had signed the contract, had accepted the money, had agreed to stand in the spotlight beside a man she barely knew. As the evening wore on and the initial shock faded, Claire began to notice something unexpected. When Ryan looked at her during conversation, his attention seemed genuine rather than performed. When he laughed at something she said, the sound was real, unguarded. And when his hand found hers under the table, the touch lingered longer than necessary for show. By the time they returned to the car, exhaustion had settled into Claire's bones. But as they drove through the city streets, Ryan turned to her with something that might have been respect in his expression. "You did well tonight," he said. "Better than I expected." Claire met his gaze, seeing past the billionaire mask to the man underneath. The one who had looked as trapped as she felt before that impulsive kiss changed everything. "So did you," she replied softly. Neither spoke for the rest of the drive, but something had shifted between them. They had survived their first night as a public couple, had weathered the storm together. It was only the beginning, and the road ahead promised more challenges than either could predict. But for tonight, they had proven they could stand side by side, against a world that wanted to tear them apart. As Claire climbed the stairs to her apartment, guards now stationed outside for her protection, she touched her lips and remembered. The kiss at the gala. The contract on her table. The money that would transform her life. She had entered into an arrangement born of desperation and impulse. Agreeing to pretend feelings she did not have for a man she did not know. What terrified her most was the growing suspicion that pretending might become harder than she thought. Not because the role was difficult, but because something real was starting to bloom beneath the lies. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Claire discovered that surviving in Ryan Sterling's world required armor she did not possess. Every morning brought fresh headlines, each one more invasive than the last. Reporters had interviewed her former neighbors, dug through her social media history from high school, even tracked down teachers who vaguely remembered her. They published unflattering photos taken from bad angles, compared her appearance unfavorably to Victoria Hammond's polished elegance, and speculated endlessly about what Ryan could possibly see in someone so ordinary. The attacks came from all directions. Online forums dissected her every outfit, her body language, the way she held her fork at dinner. Fashion bloggers created cruel comparison posts showing Victoria's designer wardrobe next to Claire's modest clothing. Social media users who had never met her felt entitled to judge her worthiness, her motives, her very existence. The cruelty was breathtaking in its creativity and relentlessness. Claire tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the money accumulating in her new bank account and the photography courses she had finally enrolled in, but the words wormed their way into her thoughts during quiet moments. Gold digger, social climber, opportunist, fraud, each label carved away at her sense of self, till she sometimes forgot who she had been before that kiss transformed her into a public spectacle. Behind closed doors, the arrangement required Claire to spend 3 nights each week at Ryan's penthouse, maintaining the illusion of a genuine relationship. The space was stunning, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern architecture. With views that stretched across the entire city, Claire had her own bedroom, of course, a guest suite larger than her entire apartment. But the grandeur only emphasized how much she did not belong. On her 4th night there, Claire stood at the windows watching the city lights blur through tears she refused to shed. She had attended another charity event that evening, enduring whispers and sidelong glances from women who made no effort to hide their contempt. One had actually asked, loud enough for others to hear, whether Claire had taken etiquette lessons yet, or if Ryan was simply hoping she would learn through observation. She did not hear Ryan enter until he stood beside her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He offered her one without speaking, and they stood together in silence for several minutes. Finally, he broke the quiet with unexpected gentleness. "Tell me about your mother." Claire glanced at him, surprised. They had maintained careful boundaries during their staged relationship, discussing logistics and schedules but rarely venturing into personal territory. Why do you want to know? Because every article mentions that she died when you were young, but none of them talk about who she was. They treat her like a footnote in your story instead of a person who mattered. The observation touched something raw in Claire's chest. She took a sip of wine, gathering courage, then began to speak. She told him about her mother's endless optimism despite their poverty, her determination to give Claire opportunities she had never had. She described the medical bills that had accumulated during the cancer treatment, the way her mother had apologized for dying and leaving debt behind, as if her death was somehow a failure rather than a tragedy. Ryan listened without interrupting, his full attention focused on her words. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he shared something Claire had not expected. My mother is still alive, but I barely know her. She became what my father needed her to be so completely that the woman she was before marriage just disappeared. By the time I was old enough to notice, there was nothing left of her except the role she played. I think that scared me more than anything else about marrying Victoria. Not that I would be unhappy, but that I would eventually stop being real. Claire turned to study his profile, seeing the vulnerability he usually kept hidden behind confident competence. Is that why you kissed me? Because I was real? Partly. Ryan met her gaze, something raw and honest in his gray eyes. You looked the way I felt, trapped and desperate. In that moment, you were the only genuine thing in that entire ballroom. Everyone else was performing, but you were just trying to survive. The conversation shifted something fundamental between them. They had been business partners playing roles, but now they were two people recognizing shared pain. Claire found herself talking about her abandoned dreams of art school, the illustrations she still sketched in notebooks but never showed anyone. Ryan admitted that he had once wanted to be an architect, to design buildings rather than just own them. But his father had crushed that dream before it could take root. Hours passed as they traded confessions and half-forgotten hopes. When Claire finally retreated to her bedroom, she lay awake feeling unsteady. The lines of their arrangement were blurring in ways that made her nervous. Ryan was supposed to be her employer, nothing more. But the man who had listened to her stories about her mother with genuine compassion felt dangerously like a friend. The cracks in the facades, their public appearances continued. Claire and Ryan developed an easy rhythm that surprised them both. He learned to read her discomfort in the tension of her shoulders, steering conversations away when reporters grew too aggressive. She discovered his tells when stress mounted, the way his jaw would tighten almost imperceptibly before he delivered a cutting response to someone who had overstepped. At a museum gala, an older businessman made a crude joke about Ryan's taste in women, implying that Claire's appeal was purely physical. Before Claire could formulate a response, Ryan's arm wrapped around her waist, and he replied with icy precision that his girlfriend was enrolled in one of the most competitive photography programs in the country, and that her talent far exceeded anything the businessman had accomplished in his mediocre career. The man had sputtered and retreated, and Claire had felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Later that night, she had thanked him for defending her. Ryan had looked almost surprised. You do not need to thank me for basic decency. Anyone who disrespects you, disrespects me. The protective instinct should have felt like part of the performance, but it did not. There was real anger in his voice when people were cruel to her. Genuine pride when he introduced her photography work to potential clients. The boundaries of their arrangement grew hazier with each passing day. When the past, reservist Victoria Hammond had remained silent since the gala, but her absence felt more threatening than any direct confrontation. Then, 3 weeks into Claire and Ryan's public relationship, Victoria made her move. She arranged an exclusive interview with the city's most prominent lifestyle magazine, appearing on the cover in a white suit that evoked bridal imagery. The article painted her as the wronged woman, dignified in her heartbreak, gracious enough to wish Ryan happiness, even as she mourned the future. They had planned together, but the truly damaging content came in her carefully worded suggestions. Victoria mentioned that she hoped Claire understood the responsibilities that came with being involved with someone like Ryan, she expressed concern about whether someone from Claire's background could handle the pressure and scrutiny. She wondered aloud whether Ryan might be going through some kind of crisis, acting impulsively in ways he would later regret. Every word was poison wrapped in silk, designed to plant doubt without making explicit accusations. The interview went viral within hours. Suddenly, the narrative shifted from romantic rebellion to reckless mistake. Think pieces appeared questioning Ryan's judgment, suggesting that his relationship with Claire was evidence of deeper problems. Investors began calling emergency meetings. Board members whispered about stability and leadership. Ryan's father seized the opportunity to escalate pressure. Robert Sterling arrived at the penthouse unannounced, brushing past security with the arrogance of someone who had never been told no. Claire was in the kitchen when he stormed in, and she heard every word of the argument that erupted. "This farce has gone on long enough," Robert's voice thundered through the open space. "Victoria has given you a graceful way back. End this ridiculous relationship and repair the damage you have caused." "I am not ending anything." Ryan's response was calm but immovable. "And it is not ridiculous. Claire matters to me." Claire's breath caught at the conviction in his words. She knew she should announce her presence, but she remained frozen, listening. "She is a waitress with nothing to offer this family," Robert spat. "A temporary distraction you are confusing with something meaningful. You are risking everything we've built for someone who will never understand our world." "Maybe that is exactly why she matters. Because she does not measure everything in profit margins and social connections. Because when she looks at me, she sees a person instead of a business asset." The fierce protectiveness in Ryan's voice made Claire's chest ache. She finally stepped into view, meeting Robert Sterling's contemptuous glare with as much dignity as she could gather. The older man looked her up and down with open disdain, then turned back to his son. "When this ends badly, do not expect me to clean up the mess." He strode toward the exit, pausing only to deliver one final warning. "You are throwing away your legacy for someone who will leave the moment someone better comes along. That is what people like her do." The door slammed behind him and silence filled the penthouse. Claire stood motionless, Robert's words echoing in her mind. Someone who will leave the moment someone better comes along. Was that what Ryan thought? That she was here only for the money, counting down the days until their arrangement ended? The confession Ryan crossed to where she stood, his expression troubled. "I am sorry you had to hear that. My father has no right to speak about you that way." "He is not entirely wrong, though, is he?" Claire's voice emerged, smaller than she intended. "I am here because you are paying me. When our contract ends, I will leave. That is the arrangement we agreed to. Is that what you want?" Ryan asked quietly. "For this to just be a business transaction?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither had been willing to acknowledge. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs as she struggled to find an honest answer. Over the past week, something had shifted. The man she had agreed to pretend to care about had become someone whose opinion mattered, whose smile could lift her mood, whose presence made her feel safer than she had in years. "I do not know what I want anymore," she admitted. This was supposed to be simple. Pretend for a few months, take the money, move on with my life. But nothing about this feels simple now. Ryan stepped closer, close enough that she could see the conflict in his gray eyes. "No, it does not. Somewhere between the cameras and the performances, something real happened. At least for me." Claire's breath stuttered. "Ryan, we cannot. This arrangement has an expiration date. You need someone from your world, someone who understands how to navigate your life. I am just a waitress playing dress-up in borrowed clothes. You are not just anything." His hand lifted to cup her face with unexpected tenderness. "You are the person who reminds me why I wanted to escape that arranged marriage in the first place. Victoria would have been perfect on paper, a flawless partner for public appearances and business mergers. But she would never have sat with me at 3 a.m. talking about abandoned dreams. She would never have looked at me like I was just a man instead of a walking bank account." Tears burned Claire's eyes. "You are making this so much harder than it needs to be." "Good, it should be hard. Things worth having usually are." The space between them crackled with tension, with words unspoken and feelings too dangerous to name. Claire knew she should step back, should remind him of their contract and the clear boundaries they had established. But her body refused to move, drawn toward him like gravity. When Ryan kissed her this time, it was nothing like the performance at the gala. This kiss was slow and searching, a question rather than a statement. Claire responded without thinking, her hands finding the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself to something solid as the world tilted around her. This was not pretend. This was terrifyingly, impossibly real. The breaking point, they pulled apart slowly, both breathing hard, foreheads resting together. Claire could feel the rapid beat of Ryan's heart beneath her palm, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. Everything had just changed, and they both knew it. "We should not have done that," Claire whispered, though she made no move to step away. "Probably not," Ryan agreed. "But I am not sorry." Claire finally found the strength to put distance between them, wrapping her arms around herself defensively. "This complicates everything. The contract, the arrangement, the plan to convince your family to back off. If we actually develop feelings for each other, how does any of this work? Maybe it does not need to work according to plan. Maybe we let it be messy and complicated and real. Claire laughed, the sound edged with something close to panic. "Nothing about this situation is real. I am living in your penthouse, wearing clothes your assistant picks out, attending events where everyone despises me. The only reason I am here at all is because you paid me to pretend. How do we build something genuine on that foundation?" Ryan flinched at the harsh truth of her words. "You are right. The circumstances are wrong in every possible way. But what I feel when I am with you, that is not pretend. That is not something I can pay for or manufacture. Somehow in the middle of this disaster, I started caring about you. Not the role you are playing, but the woman who still sketches children's book illustrations in notebooks she thinks no one sees. The person who tears up at sad commercials but tries to hide it. The one who is terrified of this world but refuses to run away from it." Claire's throat tightened with emotion. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that something true had grown between them, despite the lies surrounding their relationship. But fear held her back, the same fear that had governed her entire life. People like her did not end up with people like Ryan Sterling. Fairy tales were for children's books, not reality. "I need time to think," she finally said. "This is too much. Too fast. Everything is tangled up with money and contracts and public perception. I do not even know what is real anymore." Ryan nodded, disappointment flickering across his face. "Take all the time you need. But Claire, whatever you decide, know that my feelings are not part of the performance. They stopped being fake the moment I started looking forward to coming home because you might be here." The choice ahead that night. Claire lay in her luxurious bedroom, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning through everything that had happened. In just a few weeks, her entire life had been transformed. She had money in the bank, enrollment in her dream program, and a man who claimed to care for her beyond the terms of their contract. It should have felt like a miracle, like every wish granted at once. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, one step away from either flight or devastating fall. If she let herself believe Ryan's feelings were genuine, if she admitted that her own emotions had grown far beyond what their arrangement demanded, she was risking everything. When this inevitably fell apart, when the novelty wore off and he realized how incompatible their worlds truly were, she would be left with nothing but heartbreak, the memory of briefly touching something beautiful. But if she walked away now, if she honored the contract and kept her heart safely guarded, would she spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been? Would she regret choosing safety over the terrifying possibility of real connection? Her phone buzzed with a message from Ryan, sent from his bedroom down the hall. Just 3 words that made her chest ache with longing and fear in equal measure. "You are worth waiting for." Claire closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her temples. She had entered this arrangement believing she was strong enough to pretend, to play a role without getting lost in it. She had been wrong. Somewhere between staged photographs and late-night conversations, between public performances and private moments of vulnerability, she had fallen for the man behind the billionaire facade. The question now was whether she had the courage to admit it. To risk everything on the possibility that what they had built on a foundation of lies could somehow transform into something true and lasting. Outside her window, the city glowed with a million lights, each one representing a life being lived, a choice being made, a person deciding whether to play it safe or leap into the unknown. Claire Bennett had spent her entire life being invisible, choosing safety and survival over dreams and risks. But Ryan Sterling had seen her anyway, had pulled her into the spotlight, and refused to let her disappear. He had offered her money and protection, yes, but he had also offered something far more valuable and far more dangerous. He had offered her the chance to be seen, to be valued, to matter to someone who had everything but had chosen her anyway. The girl who had been nobody, who had served champagne to people who never looked at her face, had somehow become the center of a billionaire's world. Whether that was a fairy tale or a disaster waiting to happen, only time would tell. But as dawn broke over the city and Claire finally drifted into restless sleep, she knew one thing with certainty. Pretending was over. What happened next would be real, in all its messy, terrifying, beautiful complexity. The storm had only just begun, but for the first time in her life, Claire Bennett was ready to stand in the rain instead of running for shelter. Whatever came next, she would face it beside the man who had kissed her in front of the world and changed everything. And maybe, just maybe, they would find a way to turn their desperate arrangement into something neither had dared to hope for, something true, something lasting, something worth all the risk and chaos and heartbreak that loving across impossible divides demanded. The contract that brought them together had an expiration date, but the feelings growing between them recognized no such boundaries. In the end, Claire realized the most dangerous bargain she had made was not agreeing to pretend to be Ryan Sterling's girlfriend. It was allowing herself to stop pretending at all.